Hey, what's up, Unbroken Nation? What do you do in those moments when you do let yourself down, though?
I mean, I try to have grace with myself. Usually when I let myself down, it's because I made a mistake more so than
You didn't try.
I didn't try,
Yeah.
because I'm not the kind of person, I'll try anything.
Yeah.
And there are times where I'm like, yeah, well, so, I always wanted to do, do a bodybuilding competition. So I was training for one when I was in my early 20s and I got injured and I never made it. So when I was 40, I went back and I started training to do all this bodybuilding. I was in the best shape of my life, right? But it came to be about competition time, and I was like, yeah, I'm not really into this.
Mm.
It's taken away from my bigger goals, which is work. There were some things that were being required of me, like, the final lean out, where you got to get real
You
lean.
just got to starve
I
yourself
just
for 3
really wasn't
weeks.
into it. And I'm like, I had to just tell myself, look, the 20-year-old me and the 40-year-old me are not aligned as far as that goal was. But I tried, and I don't feel bad about that.
Yeah.
I mean, how many 40-year-olds do you know even try?
No. And that's so interesting, too, because I think the older that people get, the more they're willing to quit on themselves.
Yeah.
And I look at it, I have a client and, working with adult survivors of childhood trauma, like this is a really intense space. And she's like fucking 64 years old. She's like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm still alive. There is still time. And my hope is that people won't quit on themselves, that they won't give
Right.
that they'll seek self-love and ultimately find that thing that brings them, fulfillment and joy and happiness, and do it through a word I think you use, which is really important, grace.
Yeah.
Because fuck, you're gonna fuck up a lot all the time, every day. And I think so many people get tied into this idea of perfection and making sure it's great so everybody else can see it. And I'm just like, if you knew how many episodes of this show have not been released or were recorded that I forgot to press fucking record, or that the mic wasn't
Sure.
plugged in or whatever, and you're just like, well, you don't quit. You just keep going. Just keep doing it. Big goal energy. I love this idea. I love the concept because I think that ultimately big goals are what will pull you forward into the existence that you can create. I think a lot of people are stuck in not knowing how to navigate that. So as someone who is a CEO, an entrepreneur, also a wife and a mom, and all the other incredible things that I know that you do that I'll let you bring to light if you choose to, how do you create goals? How do you manage life? How do you move forward with all of the different elements that you have encompassing you all the time?
I think goal creation is a process, and I think that's not talked about a lot because I think people think you have to have clarity on the goal, right? My goals are constantly evolving. And sometimes I'm trying new things. And then there are a lot of things pulling me, right? I've got my company that I'm running. I have these side projects that I'm doing. I have children. Then I'm trying to be a good parent. And, I've heard you talk about this too. I'm trying to break generational behaviors as a parent. And, there's a lot of me going into that, right? And actually that's part of that's part of my my journey too. There was a time early on when I first had my first kid. Everybody, when I started with Gate Master, I was the youngest and the only woman. And I remember I could hear a lot of the guys saying, when she has a baby, she's out of here.
You literally heard them say that?
I heard them say it.
Yeah.
And it would break my heart because I'm like, why can't I have both? Why can't I have both? That being said, I have delivered at least, I was on a client call in labor with my first. I'm really dedicated to this
you're
work
fucking
thing.
made for TV
Now,
movie.
do I, and granted, I've had women come to me and say, hey, you've created impossible standards for women. But, I'm not trying to create standards for anybody. I'm just competing with me here.
Yeah.
Right. And even with my last, I had him at home. So there was no drugs involved in that childbirth. So I was not talking to anybody, right? With my first, I was epidurals, it was pain-free. I could take a client call. Right. But with my last, I had him at home and it happened so fast and it was painful enough that I was not even interested in talking to a client. And by that time, the company didn't need me to be on a phone call while I was giving birth. They had it. But I went back to work 2 days later And it wasn't to, maybe there was a little bit of like I had to prove, but more I had to prove to myself because I had made a pretty big deal. And I had told them, yes, I'm going to have a baby, but I'll be there. And he came 2 weeks early, so it messed up my plan, right? So I had to go back to work 2 days later. So, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anybody or create any standard. I was just trying to do what I said I was going to do for a client who gave me their money and believed in me enough to say, here's this big check, do your work, You said you're going to be there even if you had a baby. So I did. And I think that's a big part of the goals is just sometimes it looks different than what we thought it was going to look like, and you've got to be willing to evolve with it. You got to be able to go where it takes you. You just can't give up on what that is. Now, when I became a CEO, I didn't know what was supposed to happen from there, right? I just had my eye on it. I knew that at some point Steve was going to replace himself and he was going to need an executive in that position. There was a lot of people going for that role, working towards that goal. And I knew that if I could help him grow the company and be valuable enough to him, I would get that position. And that was really, I don't have an MBA. I didn't go to college. We talked about that, right? But I knew that being valuable was important. And I think that's something that's really lost on a lot of people right now. I don't believe there aren't good people out there. I just think that we have a lot of negative beliefs about work culture today. And I think it's coming from both sides, both the employers and the employees, where, they're not being valued, the employee, and the employee doesn't value the job. Now, one of the things I talk about, actually, I'm going to be at the Florida Attractions Association next week talking about the generational divide. That was not a title that I picked. I probably would have picked something different. But I think it's interesting because it is important to them. They believe that a lot of this is generational. To me, I believe that, if you don't have alignment, it doesn't matter what generation we're dealing with. True. Right? However, you hear a lot of people talking about there's no good people to work these days, right? And I hate that. I hate hearing that because I don't think that's what it is. I think there's a couple of things happening, One, the baby boomers, there's not enough of us to replace them. So the people who are getting the jobs have a lot more options than they did, the people who came before them. And then two, maybe that's created a little bit of entitlement. And so people aren't trying to be as valuable to the people who hire them. I really value the people that want to add value to what I'm doing. And because of that, it's important to me to help them achieve their goals. But that's also how I gauge whether or not this is somebody I should be helping.